I opened my practice on Valentine's Day, 1980, and one of the gifts that I received was a poster. It was the first photo taken by, I think it was Alan Shepard, after they went around the moon and saw the Earth for the first time. And the photo is just spectacular of our planet. And the caption underneath it says, "We are all on the same boat." And I thought about where I live and that who's on the other side of the door where I live, and do I really know that person? And are they that different than me? And how we have these territories that we live within, or these boundaries. And we have that in healthcare. And I've spent 30 years studying this, and the message that I want to bring to the world is that three parts to it. Atherosclerosis, the mechanism in what we think is the #1 cause of dying, cardiovascular disease. Atherosclerosis is autoimmune in its initiating phases. It begins with your immune system attacking self. Cancer is most often autoimmune in its initiating phases. Autoimmune diseases have been considered the #3 cause of morbidity and mortality behind cardiovascular disease and cancer. If you pool all of the autoimmune diseases, they're in different silos of medicine, neurology, and rheumatology. But if you pool them together, it's considered the #3 cause of morbidity and mortality in the industrialized world. I suggest it's #1. The mechanism is #1. It doesn't matter if it's #1 or #3, it's really important, and that almost everyone in this room has an autoimmune mechanism going on now. It was Melissa Arbuckle in 2003 that published a study, and she looked for people with lupus in the VA. She found 132 people with lupus. Well, if they're in the VA system, they're veterans. If they're veterans, they were in the armed forces. If they were in the armed forces, they had their blood drawn many times over the years when they were in the armed forces. And the government's been freezing and saving all of that blood since 1978. They've got tens of millions of samples of our service people's blood. So Arbuckle asked for permission to go back and look at the blood of the currently diagnosed lupus patients when they were healthy in the Air Force or in the Navy. What did she find? Every single one of them had all 7 antibodies to lupus elevated years before they ever had symptoms. It went back as far as 9 years that every antibody was elevated. Some of them only 20% elevation, some much higher to start with, but they all climbed every year until they plateaued, and all of a sudden they get symptoms, and 6 months to a year and a half later, they get diagnosed with lupus. When did they get lupus? Back here. And she identified that this prodromal period from when the antibodies were first elevated until the symptoms were first noticed, this silent period goes on for years. And it gives us the window of opportunity to address whatever the mechanism is that's going on. Immunologists read that study in the New England Journal of Medicine 2003 and said, that's brilliant. Let's go back and look at some of the blood in blood banks of rheumatoid patients and multiple sclerosis patients. And there have been so many studies done that now we know the positive predictive value, the PPV. If you have elevated antibodies to thyroperoxidase, TPO antibodies, especially postpartum, you have a 92% positive predictive value of getting Hashimoto's within 7 years. 92%. If you have elevated ASCA antibodies, that's Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which is a yeast in the gut, normal in the gut, but if you have elevated antibodies to it, you have close to 100%, you're getting Crohn's within 3 years. This is published. It's all published. And they've got it for rheumatoid and for celiac and for diabetes and antiphospholipid syndrome. It's all published that there is this prodromal period and how much time before the disease will manifest and you get a diagnosis. So I propose to all of us in the healthcare world that we be aware that the number one, or number three, mechanism of getting sick and dying in the world is going on for years inside of all of us before we have symptoms. And that this prodromal period can be identified, which gives you the window of opportunity to present to the patient that they can do something about this. It's not destiny that they get Alzheimer's. So, the world of positive predictive value and autoimmunity. Thank you so much.